I didn't know I was being set up until I saw the phone on the table. Screen down, camera facing me, and HR saying very calmly, "This is just for our records." That's when I realized they weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to make me quit on video. I'm not a dramatic person. I'm 34, operations analyst at a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of job where you fix other people's messes quietly and go home tired. I'd been there almost 4 years. Good reviews. No write-ups. The kind of employee managers describe as solid when they don't want to say anything else. The problem started small. Too small, honestly. A few hours of overtime missing here and there. Nothing wild. I assumed it was a payroll glitch, so I sent my manager, Mark, a short email with screenshots from our shift system. He replied in 10 minutes. Friendly. Thanked me for flagging it. Said payroll would clean it up. They didn't. The next pay period, the same thing happened. Hours shaved down. Lunch breaks extended on paper when I'd worked straight through. This time I asked in person. Mark's tone changed. Still polite, but tighter. He said corporate was sensitive about labor metrics and that sometimes adjustments were made for consistency. I asked what that meant. He smiled and said, "Let's loop HR." That meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Calendar invite said coaching conversation. No agenda. Just me, Mark, and HR. I didn't think much of it. I even brought notes, like an idiot, assuming we were going to fix the issue. The room was one of those glass-walled conference rooms that makes you feel visible and trapped at the same time. HR rep, Lena, was already there. Laptop open, notepad ready. Mark sat beside her, not across from me. That should have been the first sign. We exchanged pleasantries, weather, commute. Then Lena placed her phone on the table, face down, slightly angled. She said, "We record meetings sometimes, just to make sure we capture everything accurately." I asked if that was standard. She said, "It can be." Then she smiled and added, "Nothing to worry about." They didn't start with overtime. They started with my attitude. Mark said he'd noticed I seemed frustrated lately. HR asked how I was feeling about my role. I answered honestly, I liked my job, but I wanted my hours recorded correctly. That's when the questions changed shape. Lena asked if I felt supported, if I thought the environment was a good fit, if I'd considered other opportunities. Each question sounded optional, but the tone underneath wasn't. It felt like being guided toward a door without being told to leave. Then Mark said, "Sometimes people decide to step away when expectations don't align." I said I wasn't stepping away. There was a pause, not an awkward one, a calculated one. Lena leaned forward and said, "Just to be clear, are you saying you're choosing to continue employment here?" The way she said it made my stomach drop. Choosing. Continue. Employment. Clean words meant to be repeated later. I said yes. Of course I was. She nodded, typed something, then asked, "And you're not resigning today?" I looked at Mark. He didn't look back. "No," I said. "I'm not resigning." Mark exhaled slowly like I'd disappointed him. "We just want to make sure we're aligned," he said. "Because if this isn't working for you, it's okay to say that." That's when I realized what the video was for. They weren't documenting a conversation. They were fishing for a sentence they could use. One clip, one line. Me saying something they could edit into a resignation. I stayed calm. I repeated myself. I said I wanted to keep my job and be paid correctly. Every time I answered, they reframed the question. Softer, then sharper. HR asked if I felt forced to stay. Mark asked if I felt trapped. I said no, but I wasn't quitting. The air in the room felt heavier with every minute. Not hostile. Worse. Controlled. After almost 40 minutes, Lena said, "We'll take this under advisement." Mark stood up immediately. No resolution, no next steps. Just a polite ending to something that didn't feel finished. As I walked out, I noticed the phone was still recording. I didn't know it yet, but that meeting wasn't the end of the problem. It was the moment they decided to turn my own voice against me. The email went out before I even made it back to my desk. Team, effective today, John has decided to pursue opportunities outside the company. We thank him for his contributions. I stared at my screen, reread it twice, then checked the timestamp, sent 12 minutes ago, while I was still walking down the hall. My badge still worked, but my access didn't. Slack logged me out. The shared drive kicked me back with a permissions error. It wasn't subtle, it was surgical. I walked straight to Mark's office. He wasn't there. His calendar was suddenly private. HR didn't answer my call. When I emailed Lena, I got an automated reply. Out of office. Back tomorrow. By noon, people were avoiding eye contact. A few coworkers texted me privately. Short, careful messages. Hey, heard you resign? Another one. Did something happen? I replied the same thing to all of them. I didn't resign. No one answered back. I packed my bag under the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, feeling like I'd broken some rule everyone else understood, but me. On my way out, IT asked for my laptop. No explanation, just procedure. That was the first moment anger crept in. Not explosive anger, the cold kind. The kind that sharpens instead of blurs. At home, I pulled up my personal email. There it was, from HR. Subject line, confirmation of voluntary separation. They thanked me for my time. Attached was a single-page document titled Resignation Acknowledgement. My name typed neatly at the top. No signature, no date. Just a statement saying I'd communicated my intent to resign during a recorded meeting. I replied immediately. I wrote that I had not resigned verbally or otherwise. I asked them to correct the record. I asked for a copy of the recording. They responded an hour later. During the meeting, you indicated dissatisfaction with your role and a desire to move on. This was captured on video. That was a lie, a clean one, the kind that sounds reasonable if you weren't there. 2 days later, my unemployment claim was denied. Reason, voluntary resignation. They'd submitted evidence, a video clip. I didn't see it yet, but I could picture it perfectly. Me, sitting at that table, calm, tired, saying something like I'm frustrated or I don't think this is being handled right, cropped, isolated, stripped of context, turned into proof. Rent was due in 3 weeks. Health insurance ended at the end of the month. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, waking up with the same thought looping in my head. They're going to get away with this. For a full day, I almost let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth the stress, that fighting companies never ends well, that I should just move on. Then I opened my old pay stubs. That's when something clicked. I lined up 3 months of records, compared them to my own notes, shift logs, calendar entries, emails sent after hours. The pattern wasn't random, it was consistent. Time shaved the same way, always when labor ran hot. Always rounded down. I remembered something Mark had said in that meeting. Offhand, almost casual. Corporate watches labor closely. At the time, it felt like a warning. Now it felt like a confession. I requested my personnel file in writing. HR had to comply. I requested copies of all recordings related to my employment. They stalled. I appealed the unemployment denial and checked the box that said employer misrepresented separation. That was when their tone changed. They emailed saying they'd AITA stand by their documentation, that the video clearly showed my intent, that further communication should go through their legal department. Good, because that meant this wasn't just about unemployment anymore. I scheduled a consultation with an employment attorney. I didn't dramatize it. I laid out the facts. The missing overtime, the meeting, the recording, the email. He didn't interrupt. He didn't promise anything. He just asked one question at the end. Do you know if the video you saw was the full recording? I said no. He nodded slowly. Then don't worry about the clip, he said. Worry about the rest of it. That night, I stopped feeling humiliated. I started feeling focused. The first week after that felt like falling through air. I woke up at the same time every morning out of habit, heart already racing before I remembered why. No Slack pings, no calendar reminders, Just silence and the low hum of anxiety that followed me from room to room. I checked my bank account more often than I'm proud of, did the math in my head over and over. Rent, insurance, groceries, time. I wasn't spiraling exactly. I was compressing, like everything unnecessary was being squeezed out of me. Friends told me to relax. My parents told me to move back home for a bit. Recruiters sent cheerful emails that went nowhere once they asked why I'd left my last role. Every conversation ended the same way, with me explaining briefly, carefully, that I hadn't quit, that it was complicated. Complicated is what people say when they don't want to hear the rest. The attorney told me to slow down and document everything. So I did. I built a timeline on my kitchen table like a crime scene reconstruction. Printed emails, pay stubs, screenshots, calendar invites. I labeled everything. Dates, times, who said what. It wasn't dramatic. It was boring. And that's what made it effective. When my personnel file finally arrived, it was thinner than it should have been. Performance reviews were there, benefits paperwork, but the coaching meeting notes were vague, almost comically so. No mention of overtime, no mention of my refusal to resign, just a neutral paragraph about career alignment. There was also a memo I hadn't seen before. Internal. Mark to HR. Timestamp the morning of the meeting. Employee appears disengaged, maybe considering other options. Recommend documenting. Documenting, not discussing, not resolving. Documenting. I felt something crack then. Not anger, understanding. They hadn't panicked. They hadn't improvised. This was a process. One they'd used before. I appealed the unemployment denial formally. That triggered a hearing. Not court, not yet, but close enough to make things uncomfortable. They responded with confidence, submitted their evidence again. The video clip. Same justification. Voluntary resignation. My attorney requested the full, unedited recording as part of discovery. HR replied that the clip accurately represented the meeting and that the full file was not relevant. That phrase stuck with me. Not relevant. As if context was optional. The waiting was the worst part. Days stretched. Every email notification made my stomach drop. I replayed the meeting in my head constantly, wondering if I'd missed something. Some sentence, some inflection, anything they could twist. At night, doubt crept in. Maybe I had sounded uncertain. Maybe I'd said something that could be interpreted the wrong way. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't emotional. I'd been careful. Too careful, maybe. Then the attorney called. They produced the file, he said. I didn't breathe. The clip? The whole thing. Apparently, once the hearing officer requested it, refusing wasn't an option. They'd sent over the original recording, metadata intact. We watched it together, start to finish. It was worse than I remembered. Not for me, for them. You could hear the pressure in their voices. The way questions were rephrased after I answered clearly, the pauses after I refused to resign, Mark interrupting me when I tried to talk about hours, HR prompting, so you're saying you don't see a future here? Then again, and again. At one point, Mark said, if payroll fixes aren't possible, some people choose to exit gracefully. I responded plainly, I'm not choosing that. No ambiguity, no hesitation. There was also a moment I'd completely forgotten. Lena said, we sometimes adjust time cards to stay within targets. She said it casually, like it was common knowledge. The attorney paused the video there. That, he said, isn't coaching. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded, like a man confirming something he already suspected. They thought you were gone, he added quietly. They weren't expecting this to be seen. I sat back in my chair, exhausted, not relieved, not vindicated, just clear. For the first time since that meeting, the story made sense, not in pieces, as a whole. They hadn't fired me. They hadn't pushed me out emotionally. They'd tried to erase me cleanly, with my own face as the receipt, and now that receipt told the wrong story. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who finally knew where the leverage was. The hearing date landed in my inbox like a threat and a promise at the same time. Unemployment appeal. 15 minutes. Phone hearing. A hearing officer, me, and the company's representative. No jury, no speeches. Just facts and credibility. HR suddenly wanted to talk. Their legal department emailed, polite but stiff, asking if I'd be open to resolving the matter informally. No apology, no correction, just an offer to withdraw their objection to unemployment if I agreed to close the complaint. My attorney told me not to answer yet. They were nervous. I could tell by the timing. Companies don't reach out when they're confident. They reach out when something feels unstable. The day before the hearing, they submitted a supplemental brief. More language, more certainty. Same edited clip. Same claim. Voluntary resignation captured on video. I barely slept that night. The hearing started on time. The officer introduced herself, explained the process, then asked the company to go first. Their rep spoke smoothly, used phrases like employee dissatisfaction, career misalignment, clear intent to separate. Then she referenced the video. I waited. When it was my turn, I didn't argue emotionally. I didn't accuse. I asked one thing. May the full recording be entered into the record? There was a pause. The company rep objected, said the clip was sufficient, said the rest was irrelevant. The officer asked why the full file wasn't relevant. The rep said, because the employee's intent is already clear. The officer didn't respond right away. She asked a few neutral questions, clarifications, dates. Then she said something that shifted the room, even through a phone line. I'm going to need to hear the full recording. The rep tried again, cited time, privacy, scope. Denied. They asked for a continuance. Denied. The officer said the words slowly, carefully. If the separation was voluntary and captured on video, context should support that. Please provide the unedited file. There was silence on the other end. Not technical silence, human silence. Someone realizing a door just closed. They emailed the file within the hour. A week later, the case escalated, because the hearing officer flagged something, not just for unemployment, but for potential retaliation tied to wage complaints. That triggered a referral, not criminal, administrative, enough to force disclosure. That's how it ended up in an actual courtroom. Not dramatic, no gallery, just wood benches and a judge who'd seen this movie before. The company's attorney leaned hard on professionalism, policies, procedures, claimed the recording showed a mutual understanding. My attorney asked to play the full video. The judge allowed it. I didn't watch their faces, I watched the judge. The video started innocently. Small talk. The phone visible on the table. Screen down. Then the questions. The reframing. The pressure. HR asking the same thing 3 different ways. Mark interrupting me, talking over my answers. Then the line about labor targets. The judge raised his hand. Paused the video. Rewind that, he said. It played again. We sometimes adjust time cards to stay within targets. He looked at the company attorney. Did I hear that correctly? The attorney didn't answer immediately. The judge resumed the video. When I said clearly, I am not resigning, the room went quiet. Not because it was loud, because it was unmistakable. The edited clip they'd relied on made sense now. Without the rest, you could imply anything. With it, their story collapsed under its own weight. The judge didn't lecture. He didn't need to. He asked a few questions about timekeeping, about why access was cut immediately, about why an email announcing my resignation went out before I left the building. There were no good answers, just legal ones, thin ones. He ordered a payroll audit, narrow scope, last 12 months, my department only. That was the moment I felt it. Not relief, not victory, control. They had tried to move fast and quietly. Now everything was slow and visible. As we stood to leave, the company attorney asked for a sidebar with mine. Low voices, tight smiles. I didn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. Because when my attorney turned back to me, he nodded once and said, "They're asking about settlement." I looked back at the empty judge's bench. For the first time since that glass-walled room, the chaos wasn't pointed at me anymore. It was spreading outward, and they were standing in the middle of it. The settlement didn't come with an apology. I didn't expect one. It came as an email titled, "Proposed Resolution," written in careful language that avoided admitting anything while quietly conceding everything that mattered. Unemployment benefits approved retroactively. Back pay for the overtime discrepancies, calculated by an outside payroll firm. A separation agreement that classified my exit as involuntary, with a neutral reference clause and a non-retaliation provision attached. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. The judge signed off the following week. The payroll audit never expanded publicly, but it didn't need to. It did its work in silence. Mark was placed on administrative leave before the audit even closed. HR announced a process review shortly after. The phrasing was familiar: documentation, alignment, improvement. I wasn't there to hear the rest. My attorney told me I could speak at the final hearing if I wanted. I declined. Everything that needed to be said was already on record. My voice didn't need to be louder. It just needed to exist where they couldn't edit it. The money helped, obviously. It bought time, stability, a chance to breathe without checking my balance every morning. But that wasn't the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was how ordinary it all became once the fear burned off. I found a new job 3 months later, smaller company, fewer layers. During the interview, they asked why I'd left my last role. I told the truth, briefly, not defensively, not bitterly, just the facts. No one flinched, no one pried. On my first day, my new manager handed me a printed copy of the timekeeping policy and said, "If anything here ever looks wrong, tell me." I believed him. Sometimes I think about that conference room, the phone on the table, the way they'd assumed I'd fold or panic or say the wrong thing just to make it stop. They weren't evil, they were efficient, and they'd counted on me being small. I wasn't. Not because I fought loudly, not because I outsmarted them in some dramatic way, but because I paid attention. I remembered what was said. I asked for the boring things people don't think to ask for, the full file, the exact wording, the unedited truth. They tried to use a recording to erase me. Instead, it preserved me. Everything that followed, the ruling, the settlement, the quiet fallout, came from that single mistake. They recorded themselves doing something they couldn't defend. I don't tell this story to warn people about HR or to suggest every workplace is a trap. I tell it because power doesn't usually collapse under pressure. It collapses under exposure. If you ever find yourself in a room where the questions feel rehearsed and the camera feels unnecessary, don't rush to escape the moment. Stay present. Speak clearly. Let the record exist. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that lasts.